Good evening from Scar Island by Dan Gemeinhart. Last time we read chapters 5 and 6, I guess, and tonight we'll read 7 and 8. Give you a quick reminder of chapter 6 if it's been a while since you read it. They had finally had a good breakfast after they had this unfortunate event of all these staff members dying in a freak storm. Lightning struck them all. So they finally say what to do. Let's eat. And then the mail boat is coming. We're delivering the mail, and they decide, why don't we stay? Jonathan says. Maybe we shouldn't go, Jonathan repeated. Maybe we shouldn't tell what happened. Yet. Sebastian's eyes stayed locked on his. His jaw clenched. Jonathan cocked a question eyebrow at him, and then Sebastian nodded. What are you talking about? A kid asked. Jonathan raised his voice and put some strength in it. I'm talking about staying. Without the grown-ups. Without any grown-ups. I'm talking about all of us staying here at Slabhenge alone. What do you think about that? Chapter 7. Dead Man's Coat. Stay? Why would we do that? Francis asked. Why shouldn't we? Jonathan answered. Were any of us really that happy out there? I mean, we've got a chance here. We can live here without grown-ups, without rules. Not forever, just for a while. We could live here free, doing whatever we want. Eyes blinked at him. Think about it, Jonathan argued desperately, knowing the boat was getting closer by the second. Out there, we're just troublemakers, punks. Here we could be kings. You're crazy. No, he's not. The voice was Sebastian's. He pushed himself off the wall and faced them all. He's right. We've got a winning lotto ticket here, and we're just going to throw it away without spending any of it? The boys looked back and forth among each other. Don't you see? Sebastian demanded. How long have we all been here, besides Jonathan? 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 10? And all that time we've been crapped on. Cleaning, working, eating, garbage, kneeling on that stupid sinner's whatever, sleeping with rats, all 'cause of those jerks. And now, his eyes wandered out to the bodies behind him. And now they're gone. And we can enjoy this. Eat whatever we want, whenever we want. Eat the Admiral's chocolate, watch his TV. Use his bathroom, Tony added thoughtfully. I hear he's got actual toilet paper. Sleep in his big fancy bed, Miguel said. Go to bed whenever we want, Walter chipped in. With a light on, Jason squeaked. This is crazy, Colin interjected. You're all nuts. Nuts. Don't be such a wussy, Colin, Sebastian said. Just for a couple of days, Jonathan argued. Like a little vacation. Vacation from grown-ups. No punishment, no problems. The tall red-headed Gerald looked up at the building around them. God, he said quietly, this place would be amazing to play hide and seek in. There's plenty of food, Jonathan said. They stood quietly, each boy wrestling with his own thoughts. Colin shook his head and opened his mouth to speak, but Sebastian cut him off. We're doing it, he said, his voice hard and decisive, just for a little while. But the boat's coming, Francis pointed out. Sebastian scowled and looked out at the ocean. We've still got 5 minutes, he said. All he's coming for is the mail. Benny, do you know where the mailbag is? Sure, in the staff room. What about the guy, though? Won't he notice something? Jonathan shook his head. When I got dropped off, Mr. Vander didn't even talk to him. He stood in the shadows the whole time. Sebastian rubbed his chin roughly with his hand. But still. We have Mr. Vander's jacket and hat, Jonathan said. Well, we could get his jacket and hat. Some kid in the shadows gasped, but Jonathan kept going. And if Gerald stood on a stool or something, he'd be just as tall, wearing that hat and jacket back here in the shadows. Let's do it, Sebastian's voice was quick and bossy. Benny, run and grab the mailbag. Gerald, stay here. Everyone else get around the corner, out of sight. New kid, come with me. There was only a momentary pause, and then everyone scrambled. Colin was the only one who stayed where he was. This is so stupid, he said to no one in particular. Sebastian grabbed him roughly by his shirt. and jerked him around the corner so hard his head snapped back on his neck. He slammed him up against the stone wall. He pressed his forearm hard into Colin's chest and leaned in close to his face. Pinched his... Don't mess this up for the rest of us, you little jerk, Sebastian growled. You do, you're dead. Hey, Jonathan said. Take it easy, man. He's cool. Sebastian snorted. There's nothing cool about this little dweeb, he said. Come on, Jonathan said. Let him go. We gotta hurry. Sebastian gave Colin one last glare, then followed Jonathan out toward the heap of bodies. They stood together for a second, looking at the corpse of Mr. Vander lying in the middle of the pile. You really think we can do this, Johnny? Jonathan, it's worth a try? There was no time to be queasy or delicate. Sebastian knelt down next to the tall, still form and started pulling at his long blue coat. Damn, it's buttoned. Help me, will you? Together they frantically yanked the buttons through their holes. Jonathan kept his eyes on his fingers and away from the dead man's face. They did wander once. Let's see. Though he saw the mouth half open, a bit of dry gray tongue poking out, saw a raindrop fall off the forehead, saw a raindrop fall off his forehead, saw the swirling storm above reflected in the cloudy, unfocused eyes, and he almost lost it. His breath caught, his fingers fumbled, but he blinked and looked away and kept going. With the buttons undone, the boys started pulling the arms out of the sleeves. Mr. Vander's arms were incredibly heavy and stiff. Sebastian and Jonathan tugged and wiggled and jerked. Mr. Vander's head lolled and rocked from side to side, loose and floppy. Jonathan clenched his stomach and kept his eyes on his work. God, Sebastian panted, and I thought I hated this guy when he was alive. They got one arm loose, and with a grunting heave, they rolled Mr. Vander over onto his stomach to work on the other. His face smacked against the stone ground with a sickening thud. Sebastian grabbed his cuff of the second sleeve and gave it a swift yank, like a magician whipping the tablecloth off a table full of dishes. The jacket pulled free, and Sebastian fell back onto his butt in a puddle. Grab his hat, Johnny! They raced back toward the gate, Jonathan holding the hat and the coat stuffed under Sebastian's arm. Gerald stood alone, scratching at his neck and looking uncomfortable. Put this on, Sebastian hollered, tossing Mr. Vander's jacket at him. He ducked low and peered out of the gate. He's almost here. Man, I don't know if I want to put a dead man's coat on. Sebastian shot him a dark look. Don't put it on and you'll be a dead guy. Do it. All you got to do is stand here in the shadows. Big deal. Benny ran up, puffing and puffing, a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. He tossed it on the ground at Sebastian's feet. Gerald grimaced and pulled the long coat on. He pinched it between his fingers like a dirty diaper. The bottom of the coat piled on the ground. Jonathan gave him an apologetic look and handed him the hat. Gerald closed his eyes and plopped it on his head and dropped down onto his ears. Sebastian backed to take a look at him. Behind them, the sound of the boat got louder. Shoot, Sebastian explained. We forgot the stool. You're way too short. He looked frantically around for something for Gerald to stand on. Jonathan thought fast. He dropped to his hands and knees in the shadows just inside the gate. He can stand on me, he said, but make sure the coat covers me up. Sebastian pulled Gerald over and stepped gingerly up on Jonathan's back. He was a lot heavier than Jonathan expected. The hard stone blocks ground into his knees. He felt Sebastian adjusting the long trench coat as best he could to cover him. Wait, Gerald protested. How am I going to get this mailbag and give him ours? Outside, the motor got louder, then quieter as the gas cut back. Sebastian, Jonathan hissed from the ground. You do the bags and try to stand between him and us. All right. What do I do if he talks to me? Gerald asked, his voice high and fast. Just grunt, Jonathan answered. He's here, Sebastian said. Showtime. Jonathan lowered his head and peeked out from underneath the coat. The dingy metal boat was just pulling up to the algae-covered stone steps. It was the same boat that had dropped Jonathan off the day before, but this time Patrick was alone. Hello, Mr. Vander, Patrick shouted good-naturedly as the boat bumped up to the stairs. Gerald didn't reply. Patrick leapt expertly out of the boat onto the steps, a rope tied to the boat on one hand and a canvas bag over his shoulder. Sebastian stepped down to meet him, the mailbag in his hand. "I'll trade you," Patrick said with a smile. Sebastian just held out the bag. Patrick shrugged and took it, then handed his own to Sebastian. "What did you do to get the supreme honor of being Mr. Vander's little helper?" he asked with a wink. Sebastian froze. Nothing." Jonathan winced from underneath Gerald. Patrick squinted at Sebastian. Well, but bet you won't be doing that again now, will you?" He looked past Sebastian up to where Gerald stood atop Jonathan. "How are you there, Mr. Vander?" Gerald grunted. It sounded like a little high and nervous to Jonathan, but Patrick only nodded and smiled with half his mouth. "Good to hear it." They all stood for a moment looking at each other. Patrick cocked an eyebrow. "Well," he said, "guess I best be off. Can't stand here jabbering with ye all day, Mr. Vander." He raised one hand to his forehead in a little salute, then waved. "Give my best to the Admiral, won't you?" Gerald grunted again. Patrick laughed and hopped into the boat. Looking back over his shoulder, he threw the boat into reverse and receded slowly away from the incoming waves. All three boys watched him, holding their breath. When he was far out enough, Patrick whipped the boat around and gunned it, chugging toward the mainland. He didn't look back. Sebastian turned and walked up the stairs, a triumphant sneer in his face. "Nothing to it," he said. Jonathan rolled his eyes. Gerald hopped down from Jonathan's back and tore the coat off like it was crawling with spiders. He threw the hat down on top of it. "I'm never doing that again," he cried. Sebastian snorted and swung the big wooden door closed. "Yeah, you are. Mail comes tomorrow. 2, you know." Gerald's shoulders slumped. All the other boys were gathering around. The rain had almost stopped. Sebastian stood shoulder to shoulder with Jonathan. He still had that cocky smile on his face. "Well, boys, here we are," he said. "Got the place all to ourselves. You're welcome." They all stood looking at one another. A seagull shrieked from the top of the wall above them. "Well then," Francis said, clearing his throat, "what should we do now?" Sebastian looked at Jonathan and smiled, then looked back at the circle of questioning faces. "Whatever the hell we want," he said, and his grin widened even more. He cracked his knuckles and started walking through the circle toward the door to the main building across the courtyard. "Sebastian," Colin called after him, stopping him in mid-step. "What about the bodies?" "What about the bodies?" It's a good question, Colin. Very good question. Maybe we'll find out in chapter 8, and it is called Dragging the Dead. Seems like they're going to do something with the bodies. Okay. Hey, want to come be in the book? I have my guest of honor. Callie, come on. Come on. All right, chapter 8, Dragging the Dead. Come on. They all turned and looked at the pile of soggy corpses. Sebastian stood with his mouth open, his eyebrows frowning. Jonathan had already thought that through. "The freezer," he said. "Otherwise, they'll be stopped." He stopped and grimaced, then shrugged. "We have to put them in the freezer." Sebastian nodded at him. "That makes sense," he said. "The freezer's a long ways away," Tony said. Sebastian raised his eyebrows at him. "Then we'd better get started." Sebastian did the math of 8 bodies and 16 boys and assigned each body to 2 boys. None of the pairs would get their body more than a few feet before dropping it with a stomach-twisting, meaty splash in a puddle, though. Dead bodies are heavy, it turns out. When they're wearing rain-drenched coats and wool trousers, they're really heavy. And then they're rain-soaked bodies of men being carried by a bunch of kids who don't really want to touch them, they're almost impossibly heavy. "Okay," Sebastian barked, gasping for breath, and still holding Mr. Warwick's feet in his hands. 2 trips, 4 bodies, 4 people per body. Someone take one of these legs." The bodies were still heavy, but in teams of 4, they at least managed to drag them toward the door. It was tough going, though. Curses and accusations echoed around the courtyard. Come on, you're only pretending to hold that arm. Lift higher. It's hard to pull when the head's dragging like that. I am trying, Jason. His ankle is just too slippery. No, not by the elbow, dummy. Grab under the armpit, like this. Gross, his tongue touched me. But step by step, they got the bodies out of the courtyard and through the door and down the dark hallway and into the room where they'd eaten breakfast. The groups were spread out by then. Depending on how big a body they'd gotten stuck with, Jonathan was with Colin, Miguel, and the kid named David. They unfortunately ended up with the Admiral, and they were at the very end of the morbid, sweating, swearing parade. Dang, men, Miguel panted, wrestling with a leg that was slippery with rain. Why'd I get stuck with 3 of the littlest guys? David, who was trying to get a good grip on Admiral's right arm, shot him a look. I ain't no weakling. Nah, you know what I mean, Miguel said quickly. We all know you're tough. That's why you're here, right? For being all tough and stuff like that. Almost killing some guy or something. Jonathan glanced nervously at David, but David just rolled his eyes. No, just for fighting. Yeah, Miguel said, but like a lot of fighting, right? David shrugged and struggled for a few more steps in silence, and then he spoke again, his quiet voice a rush of frustration. I'm the only Japanese kid at my school, right? And every day, they make fun of me. They push, they throw things, whisper things, and so, yes, I fight back. So I get lots of practice, right? So after a while I start to win. And what's wrong with that? So some moron starts up again and ends up with a broken jaw and a concussion, and I'm supposed to be sorry? The judge says. David bitterly slipped into a deep adult voice. All these terrible fights, all these stitches and broken noses, and you are the common denominator. Me, I laughed at the judge, because from where I was sitting, the common denominator was all those stupid white boys. Miguel dropped the Admiral's leg and straightened up to catch his breath. Sure, man, he said, whatever you say, you're on top. You're the numerator, man. Just remember, I ain't white next time you start swinging, okay, champ? David scowled. What about you, he asked. What are you in for? Miguel shrugged. Truancy. I'm not like a super great at showing up at school, you know. My folks chose to send me here. To fix my attitude. Can you believe that? A grin spread across his face. You look at me now, choosing to stay here when we could go home. I'm reformed. He looked around at them, waiting for a laugh, but they were all too tired and out of breath. Jonathan gave him a little smile and wiped the sweat from his forehead. What about the newbie? Miguel asked. What did you do to get yourself sent here? Jonathan's smile flickered away. His eyes dropped away from Miguel's. The Admiral was looking up at him, his foul mouth open and his dead eyes gaping. Come on, Jonathan said. Let's get this over with. This guy ain't getting any lighter. The boys stooped and regained their holds and hoisted the Admiral up with a chorus of grunts and curses. This is absolutely insane, Colin complained under his breath, changing his grip around the Admiral's left armpit. We should have told right away. I'd keep that to yourself, Jonathan murmured, looking up the hallway. I think Sebastian will kick your butt if you keep talking like that. Jonathan was holding the Admiral's other limp arm and dragging him backward. Walter and David each had a leg. Sebastian, this was all your idea, Jonathan. Sebastian? This was all your idea, Jonathan. Jonathan frowned and cleared his throat. The Admiral's head rocked from side to side as they walked, looking back and forth from Colin like he was listening to the conversation. Jonathan tried to avoid the Admiral's glassy, staring eyes. Yeah, well, I was right. I didn't want to go home. The Admiral's head flipped over to Colin. Well, some of us do. The Admiral's head flopped back to Jonathan. Jonathan didn't know what to say. He looked away from the Admiral's accusing eyes. It's just for a few days, Colin, he said through gritted teeth. His fingers were burning from the Admiral's weight. Just relax, it'll be fun. The Admiral's corpse looked back to Colin. His tongue was starting to stick out. Fun? With him in charge? He'll be worth than the Admiral. Colin looked down at the Admiral's empty stare. No offense. Sebastian's not in charge, Jonathan assured him. No one is. It's just all of us. He's not taking over. Colin looked up into Jonathan's eyes and frowned, his little frown. Just wait and see, He shook his head. The inmates are running the asylum. The inmates are running the asylum? What does that mean? Colin shrugged. It's just a saying. Who says it? People. When do they say it? The Admiral's head rocked over to look at Jonathan. Colin sighed and put his shoulder under Admiral's uncooperative arm. When everything starts to go wrong. By then, some of the boys had already made it to the freezer and dropped their bodies off. They walked out of the kitchen, red-faced and sweaty. Sebastian was among them. Listen up. Once you get both your bodies put away, you're gonna meet me at the big table. We needed to decide some stuff, and hurry up. Colin shot Jonathan a meaningful look that he pretended not to see. Finally, they got the animal's bloated body to the freezer. Their breath puffed in frosty clouds as they dragged and pushed him up into the pile of corpses. Jonathan was last to leave. He slipped gratefully out of the freezer, but groaned when the door hit the Admiral's jutting boot, 6 inches shy of closing. Colin and the others are already out of the freezer door and into the kitchen, heading back for the next corpse. He kicked at the Admiral's boot, but his leg was stiff and the boot wouldn't budge. He sighed and looked over his shoulder and reluctantly walked back into the freezer. He grabbed the Admiral's under armpits and heaved, trying to twist him over and higher up on the pile of bodies. As he did so, he heard a metallic clanging and looked down. A key had fallen out of the Admiral's jacket pocket. It was a big key, rusty and old-fashioned. Jonathan glanced around and shivered. He picked up the key and slipped it into his pocket, then gave the Admiral one last push to clear the door and walked out to rejoin the rest of the boys. I noticed earlier in the first page that there was a picture of a key, an old-fashioned key right there on the first page of the chapter. So the key, they got a key out of his pocket. This may be something critical later on. Who knows? What would that be a key for? Anyway, chapter 7 and 8 are completed. And now, what's going to happen next? They're going to have a meeting, right? Sebastian is calling a meeting. Chapter 9, Scar Island. I will not read that now because Miss Beth must catch some Z's, as it were. Although, I want to read it. I've read it before. I could read it again. Good book. You can read again. Not maybe right afterwards, but anyway, enjoy your rest of whenever it is you are reading this. Day, night, morning. And we'll see you next time for chapter 9 and 10. Chapters 9 and 10. Ciao for now. Scar Island fans.